Welcome to a very special edition of Plank of the Week, because it's not Plank of the Week, it's actually Plank of the Year. You're going to be seeing all sorts of people joining in, and I'm delighted to say that kicking us off is Mark Dolan, Talk Radio's very own anti-masker, although of course he's not really an anti-masker, are you?
I'm delighted to debate all of the COVID measures.
Of course you are. And Emily Carver is also here, a woman who, if it wasn't for Dawn Neeson, would have appeared most on Plank of the Week for the whole year. We'll be seeing Dawn Neeson a little bit later on. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the top 20, starting with number 20. And it is, of course, the Welsh First Minister, Mr. Mark Drakeford.
What has been inflicted upon the Welsh people in the name of a scientific punt, as in a national lockdown, family show. And we know this is going out on Christmas Day.
It is, absolutely right.
Punt of the week, that could be a format.
That would be good,
year.
yes.
What's happened to the Welsh people, the good people of Wales, is cruel, actually. Don't forget that earlier in the year, this was a population that was subjected to the ruling in which certain non-essential items were banned from sale. So apparently an oven tray or a winter throw was the purchase of which was an arrestable offence.
Yes. Weren't books as well outlawed, Emily?
Books, any sort of entertainment, everything really. You had scenes of people trying to sort of rip down these stickers from the walls or barriers.
It was like a crime scene, wasn't it? Tesco's. They taped everything up. Unbelievable.
Yeah. So I think that's been awful, and I think that we've seen, certainly overreach and unilateral measures across the UK, but I think it's been at its worst in Wales, and I wonder whether it's the sort of left-leaning principles of Mr. Drakeford, whether you're seeing that sort of true socialism in action, a political ideology that loves to control people anyway, and the pandemic is the perfect opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, some people in Wales apparently think they're not going far enough, but I don't know what's wrong with them, because Wales is such a weird country. They've got the whole M4 corridor, which is quite busy, quite populated, and then you've got Snowdonia in the middle and North Wales over the other end. They're all completely different, aren't they?
Well, I don't know how many Welsh watchers you have or listeners you have, but they're facing another massive lockdown on the 28th, I think, as well.
Yes, I think they're
going down to tier 4 restrictions. They're not going to have any pubs open, restaurants open, non-essential shops closed too, so it's going to be pretty bleak for Wales.
I don't think you can buy a drink in Wales anywhere now.
No, you can't buy a drink. You couldn't buy a drink past 6 p.m. or there was all sorts of rules, and they change every day, the poor Welsh.
Absolutely right. Number 19, Emily, I'm going to hand over to you. Jeremy Corbyn, former leader of the Labour Party, now independent MP.
Well, I mean, he's had a pretty extraordinary year, hasn't he? Delivering the worst Labour loss for decades. So that was
30 odd years, since the 1930s, I think.
Since the 1930s, so that's the first reason why he's a plank. His most recent his revelation is that he's starting a new peace and, what is the word of it? What's it called?
Justice.
Peace and Justice Society or institution,
yes.
Which he decided to reveal on Twitter about an hour late from when he said he was going to keep the audience, waiting. So he's delivering this, and he said, we're going to bring people together. And
really?
I thought that was quite plankish.
Well, that makes a change, doesn't it? Because normally he likes to keep people apart, usually somewhere between the West Bank and Jerusalem.
I would say he's probably been the most divisive political figure in the last God knows how long.
Let's not forget, Mark, he was actually expelled from his own party for anti-Semitism.
Well, it's extraordinary, and I know this is a hard sell given present company, but the Labour Party is one of the great political outfits in the history of Western democracy, and a lot of good stuff has happened within Labour governments.
This is not a comedy show,
right?
You have to try and be reasonably serious.
Can I just point out, it's Christmas, and I've been on the eggnog. So. But what our country has pretty much sort of alternated between Labour governments, Conservative governments. The Lib Dems haven't had much of a look in, and you generally have a sort of path through our recent history in which the two different parties have made their own contributions. And what you've seen under Corbyn is almost the destruction of the Labour Party, and I think that would do our democracy a disservice. And luckily, I think that Keir Starmer has kind of stopped the rot a little bit.
You think?
But the scars remain. Labour is still a very divided party, and huge support has been lost across the north and, of course, the entirety of Scotland.
And don't forget, the reason for him to be in the Plank's top 20 is for several things that he did. You might remember fairly early on in the lockdown, Parliament was saying people should stay away because it's quite dangerous. We don't want to infect everybody, because the one thing the politicians have managed to do is they've all managed to get coronavirus or know somebody who did, much more than anybody else. You know, even old Emmanuel Macron tried to make a last-ditch effort to get on the planks list by getting coronavirus and giving it to half of the European leaders that actually went to a meeting with him. But Corbyn was the first guy back into Parliament. 70-odd, he was told if you're over 70 you shouldn't really be going out. He gets straight in a cab, slams the door as hard as he possibly can to try and break the paparazzi's arms. He then had a meal. Do you remember the meal that he had?
Yes, of course.
And it was literally Dave Spart's dinner at home with 9 people, one of whom was like a Venezuelan filmmaker or something, right? Another guy was a sort of, an artist, street artist. His partner is a Venezuelan coffee maker. I mean, it really is just a joke, isn't it?
Well, indeed, and Jeremy Corbyn is famously a teetotal and vegetarian, so how he got an invitation to a North London dinner party, I don't know.
But he lives there. That's how he got an invitation.
Oh, it was round at his house?
Yeah, wasn't it round at his house?
I see.
I thought it was.
I realised that.
Yeah.
Now he's back where he belongs, isn't he? As a sort of anti-establishment
Yeah, he's back on the
protester,
backbenches.
which is where he belongs and where he should have been all along.
But he hates Keir Starmer so much that he actually voted against the Labour abstention, didn't he?
Yeah.
On the old,
That's right.
should we shut down and go into further tiers? And I think that feud is going to keep us all going.
And also,
probably a couple of years.
maybe like a lot of over 70-year-olds in this country in relation to COVID, perhaps he wants to manage the risk on his own terms and make a decision about whether it's safe for him to go to work. So in that way, maybe he's a bit of a hero.
Well, I mean, it's not that safe for him to go to work. He has to take all the knives out of his back from the last time he went in. You know, that's the trouble. Next up, we go to number 18. And this is quite a late entry. Kay Burley from Sky TV.
The issue you've got with Kay Burley is that she and Sky News have been at the forefront of this pro-lockdown mania. And every press conference, the likes of Beth Rigby, of course, was implicated in this breaking.
How does she only get 3 months and Kay Burley gets 6? How does that work?
Well, I don't know. I think that her contravention of the rules wasn't as severe as those of Kay Burley, perhaps. But ultimately,
Or maybe people don't hate her as much.
the crime of Kay Burley and the like is hypocrisy. It's not so much what she did, which was obviously unideal, suboptimal. She didn't follow the rules carefully, but she wouldn't have gone to jail for it. She probably wouldn't have got a fine. But given where Sky News have stood, and particularly Kay Burley and Beth Rigby, the hypocrisy is too much to take.
I mean, what did you make of the Against the Century? What a terrible, tacky place to end
Well,
up.
I mean, for me, she was a plank. She could have been on this list even before this revelation, just for the way that she refused. Well, it just appears so partisan on Sky News the entirety of time. It's like she's a voice piece for New Labour. The way that she has a seething distaste for Boris Johnson and everything that he does.
Yeah, and she was
I just
pretty
think she's
hard
a
on
poor
any
journalist.
and she
to be
was very
honest.
hard on any cabinet minister that turned up, didn't she?
Oh, yeah, exactly. I just think that she's shown herself to be totally partisan, and this latest behaviour just calls her out for the hypocrite that she is. Much of our media.
But the
class
thing
are.
about how it all happened is fascinating, isn't it? The fact that she was apparently stitched up by her own colleagues at Sky TV because they don't like her very much, and I can see how that could happen.
Well, that's true. They clearly all wanted to stick the knife in.
The story goes that they actually hired the photographers.
Wow, that's
You know?
Did
professional.
they actually?
Well, I don't know if it's true, but that was the allegation.
Quite often when a public figure is sort of basically kept in post sort of by the skin of their teeth is because there's a well of goodwill within the organisation for that person. You've seen presenters and actors and others misspeak and keep their job because basically the team around them quite like them. That's clearly not the case for Kay Burley. The well of goodwill is dry and empty.
Well, hopefully it's good riddance to her now.
Well, I don't think she's coming back, to be honest, but one of them is already back today, funnily enough, as we're filming this. We're coming out on Christmas Day, but we're filming it a couple of days before. And Sam Washington, Samantha Washington, who was one of the group, is already back on air. I'm not quite sure how they handle that kind of disciplinary scenario.
What really bothers me is that news platforms like Sky News throughout the pandemic have been pro-lockdown. Every question in press conferences, especially from Beth Rigby, is why didn't you lock down sooner and why isn't the lockdown longer? And I don't think that any news platform should be pro or anti-lockdown. What you've just got to do is
How about
debate
just
the
do the
measures.
truth?
That's what they
inform
think is
people.
holding the government to account, but really holding the government to account would be to suggest that there might be another strategy available.
Well, that would be a good idea.
But,
And
that's not what they're there for.
What is
clearly.
so awful is that Kay Burley has been the champion of lockdown and pushing for it and then broken those rules herself, and that is just beyond the pale.
Yeah. Well, the next one you're going to love. Number 17, Neil Ferguson.
Oh dear.
Imperial College professor who cared so much about his own rules that he broke them on the grounds that he thought it was okay because one, he'd already had COVID, and two, he really wanted to see the woman that he fancied, who happened to be married to another bloke and who was German.
That's right. I mean, this guy's sort of history of getting his predictions about the spread of viruses wrong is epic now. He really is somebody that just must not be taken seriously. It shocks me that he still pops up on the Beeb and elsewhere as this great sage of
this
science.
is the thing. He was on BBC Newsnight, I think, just about a week
They
or
keep
two
putting
ago.
him on, don't
I think
they?
last time I was on Plank of the Week, actually, he was back on, and he wasn't just just talking about the virus or whatever. He was talking about how people had been so harsh to him and how he'd been used as a scapegoat and overtied me, how sad it is for me, and all this garbage. So he really is a plank.
He really is, absolutely right. And finally, number 16, the Metropolitan Police. There's so many reasons why, but you might not remember the situation with Cressida Dick when she broke her own rules, clapping for the NHS, hanging about on Westminster Bridge, I think it was, very in the early days of the pandemic, standing too close to people, in addition to all of the not arresting of people who were involved in the Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter protests and all the stuff. I mean, you don't know where to begin, really.
I think it's the Extinction Rebellion, the antics on that bridge.
Yes.
When they were skateboarding around.
Skateboarding and dancing.
While people weren't able to get to the hospitals that they were trying to get to, or indeed to their work. So I think that was one of the biggest plankish moments from them.
Yes, I think perceived double standards where certain political causes are allowed to just have free rein at a protest, and others, such as, an anti-lockdown march, are considered public enemy number one. And that's not a judgment that the Met Police should be making. I think, as a caveat, that they've had to execute and police some absurd rulings and mandates that come from the government. So it's really the government's fault.
No one told them to bend the knee, though.
Yeah,
taking the knee, you have to say, was probably the most stupid thing you've ever seen the police do.
Well, I think ultimately
Surely
they've had a
got
bad...
bottles thrown at them.
The cops have had a bad pandemic. The rules don't help, but you've seen crazy overreach. We're seeing, for example, I think upwards of 12 police officers turning up to close a gym early in the second national lockdown in England. And we can just think of all of the burglaries and muggings that are going on in that area whilst they're trying to close a gym.
And they were sat outside a hairdresser's, just monitoring this lady and her establishment.
That's the wrong colour. It's not the right colour. We're going to have you for that. Can you imagine? Well, listen, guys, thank you for kicking us off. We've done 20 to 15. Coming up, Emily Carver and Mark Dolan. Coming up, we're going to have two other panellists who are going to talk about the 15 down to 10 numbers on the top 20. This is Plank of the Year. Welcome back to Plank of the Year. Over to my left, you will see some people enjoying it very much. They're not just an audience, they are, of course, participants in Plank of the Year, and they will be here later on as well. Right now, though, we are back, and we're going to do numbers 15 down to 10 with Kevin O'Sullivan, Talk Radio's very own angry man, and Emma Webb, who's, of course, a political commentator. We've got to kick it off with number 15, one of our favourites, Kevin, this year, Dominic West.
Dominic West, who starred in that well-known TV series The Affair, and then decided to put it into real life. Headed off to Rome to film for another drama with the actress Lily James. If you're married,
She did everything now.
If you're a woman and you're married, keep Lily away from your husband. Anyway, Dominic West and Lily headed for the Eternal City, where they were caught on camera by photographers, hugging, kissing in a restaurant, lovingly hugging each other on a scooter.
On a scooter,
electric scooter.
I mean, talk me old-fashioned, but I mean, that romance is not dead, is it? When you can get some woman on a scooter.
Exactly.
Nothing
Now,
more romantic than a Vespa.
the slight kind of drawback was that he's married and has been happily married with kids to his wife Catherine back here in Britain. We deduced, took a bit of a dim view of these antics in Rome, and indeed when Dominic got back from Britain, having been splashed all over the papers, Love Rat of the Year, what are you doing with Lily James, you're married to this lovely woman, he organised coming out of his house with his wife as if he's some sort of politician to say nothing to see here, this marriage is strong, and actually put a sign up saying our marriage is strong, signed Dominic and Catherine, and we're all going, hey, you think your marriage is strong, Dominic? I'll tell you something, it's in deep trouble.
I know, and he also made his poor wife sort of stand next to him.
It was this very sort of like Meghan Markle style gun against the back.
Yeah, it very much.
Yeah, and then couldn't stop himself.
It was very David
smirking
Cinderella-esque. You know, the wife was standing there dutifully,
Yeah.
and he made her sort of take part in a kiss, which was awful.
Yeah, and then the kiss, he had his arms around her and sort of like
couldn't-
this.
she
And then
was
he
trying to
looked
get
at
away,
the
I think.
camera, and he looked like sort of Jack.
Oh.
He had this sort of smirk on like this. And it's like, yeah, I got away with
I
it.
got away with another one.
Silly woman. She's actually believed me. Anyway, we all said, you say your marriage is strong and is in no trouble. We've got news for you. And sure enough, about 2 days later, Catherine up stumps and went off to Ireland to stay with
Yes,
her
with
mum.
mother, yeah.
So I don't give
hasn't
that
he-
marriage much longer.
Wasn't he also particularly unkind about Donald Trump's moral qualities
Yes, he
as well?
was. I
And
think
he
that
said he
was-
was jumping for joy when he
He
found
did.
out
He was
that Donald
interviewed
Trump...
shortly before the story came out. He was interviewed, I think, on one of the morning programmes because he was promoting this show that he was doing. And he said something about jumping for joy because Donald Trump had got coronavirus. And it was just like, that's really not a very nice thing to say. Even if you don't like someone, you don't wish them
It sounds
dead.
like Catherine's made a very lucky escape.
Yeah, I think so. And the moral of this story is whether they're a prime minister or an actor, never trust an old Etonian.
Very much so. Number 14, one of your favourites ever, Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland.
Oh dear. Well, there are so many reasons why she could possibly be on this list, isn't there?
There really are.
I think the latest thing that she's done that was particularly plankish was banning the royal family
Yes.
from spending Hogmanay at Balmoral and getting antsy about the fact that Will and Kate were doing this royal
Came up on a
tour and
train,
they went to
right?
Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And I think that she said to Camilla and Charles that they weren't welcome to come up to Scotland for. So we were saying so before we started filming that, you know, it would be the best Boxing Day news coverage ever would be to see Charles and Camilla being sort of wrestled to the ground at the border by the police.
Yeah, by the border police. But they have this kind of team of people, don't they, who keep calling for there to be police patrols on the border between England and Scotland, which nobody who actually lives in Scotland wants. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable what they're calling for.
So what she spends her entire time banning things. Scotland is the world capital of banning things.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it seems as if she's trying to make it so that the Scottish people can't leave Scotland. And we know that the reason for that probably isn't anything to do with coronavirus. The
No.
way that she, even with the tier system, we had 3 tiers, she had to have 5.
Yeah.
And she obviously wants to try and, in every single instance, whether it's to do with hate crime or their vision for this utopian Scotland, they want to differentiate themselves from England as much as possible. And it's just got this nasty anti-English streak.
Yeah.
And now this sort of disrespectful attitude to the monarchy. I'm not sure how well that goes down in Scotland.
I don't think it goes down very well at all because they forget that the royals actually own most of Scotland, so they should be quite careful. It might turn badly for them when they turn out the other way around.
William Wallace, you know, blue-faced Mel Gibson in Braveheart. You'll never take our freedom, Nicola. Want to bet?
Yeah, exactly right. Well, this is the other thing she's done. She also suggested that Christmas should not be spent inside, it should be spent outside. You shouldn't have any Christmas dinner at all, you should just go for a walk.
But by the way, she also had instructions on how to serve roast potatoes and how to go Christmas shopping.
bring your own
It's
spoon.
not that she wants to meddle in anybody's life
No.
or anything.
Bring your own spoon. Don't share any kind of spoon that might be doling out potatoes to people. You can't get a drink in Scotland, by the way, anywhere now. I mean, if you're trying to stop people drinking in Scotland, I mean, hello.
What's the point of Scotland if you can't drink?
Well, her and Humza Yousaf together have become this sort of Bob
Oh yeah,
Marley
I mean,
and
not to mention, yeah,
Scrooge
well,
of-
Hamza Yousaf actually didn't quite make the top 20, but he was just about on the cusp of it for his hate crime bill, because this is the guy, with her acknowledgement and with her permission, wants to ban people from saying anything at all inside their own house,
Inside their own homes,
right?
yeah.
That might upset somebody who's not even listening.
By the way, talking about inside their own homes, among the millions of people who can't stand Nicola Sturgeon, it turns out her husband is one of them because he sold her down the river because she had this kind of dodgy meeting with Alex Salmond. Where she
The one
said
she forgot.
Yeah, which she
You
said
don't
I
remember
forgot, and it certainly wasn't business. And then her husband cropped up in the inquiry and said it was business, and you did have that meeting. I bet you the situation behind closed doors at the Sturgeon household is
Well,
not
if
very
she's that
content.
if she's that
Also-
despotic in public,
Yeah.
can you
Also,
imagine what she's
just
like
for
in her
good measure,
private
this
life?
week, the most ridiculous story of all, she represents Govan Hill, which is a particularly run-down, poor part of Glasgow, which you won't be surprised to know has not been helped particularly by Nicola Sturgeon being the MSP for it. But they've also now managed to rack up the largest number of drug deaths in Europe, in Scotland.
Yeah.
You think she might be paying a bit more attention to that?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking though that we've all had, millions of people in this country have had a terrible, terrible year, obviously. But at least we're not married to Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, you can't say that
Maybe
now.
she should marry Dominic West.
Number 13, the man who I know as Dr. Strangelove. Chris Whitty. You know, this is the bloke who's leading everybody down the garden path. He looks as if he's never had a day of any joy of any kind in his entire life. I don't think he's married. I don't think he has any kids. I don't think he does anything other than just stare at slides all day. Next slide, please. And it's like, oh, look, here's one of you and your career going down the gurgler. I mean, this bloke is unbelievable.
I just always want to say, Chris, you know, just get some...
Lighten up, man.
No, I just want to say, just get some clothes that fit. I mean, that would help your image. I mean, he's got a huge neck and tie down here and his scrawny neck and his poached egg eyes. I mean, he looks like a space alien.
He does.
And
like the Beacon is now running government policy.
But he likes to sort of project this sort of solemn image of a decent scientist, an honest broker, just trying to tell us how it is. But he's an absolute shyster.
Yeah.
He's a shyster, along with his mate Valance. I mean, they've just been basically telling us lies all year. I mean, this sort of stuff about 50,000 people a day will get it within 1 month unless we lock down. There'll be 50,000 deaths in a month unless we lock down. Oh, this isn't a projection. This is a scenario.
Yes.
Well, what does that mean? You might as well say, unless we lock down, there'll be 20 million people dead.
Yeah.
Because you're just plucking figures out of the
There'll be a
air
plague of
to
locusts.
scare people. It is blatant, thuggish, unsophisticated scaremongering, and both Valance and Whitty can do one, but particularly Whitty.
Thank you very much
It
indeed.
seems like the whole story of Chris Whitty, because there's not very much you can say about him, really, is there, other than sort of
go away.
Yeah,
And I use the term
lost.
loosely. Yeah.
But the whole story of Chris Whitty throughout the course of this year is sort of the classic myth of the person who sort of gets drunk, falls asleep, and when he wakes up, everyone's pretending that he's king, and he just sort of goes along with it and doesn't really know what he's doing. And he's like, yeah, just, you know, shut the whole place down, harder, longer,
Yes.
you know,
He
keep
does have
them
that
all
look
in
about him
jail.
as if somebody shaved his eyebrows. I don't know if he actually has eyebrows, but that's another story. Now we're going to move swiftly on to a woman who dominated the news for a while, actually, Dawn Butler, the Labour MP, you might remember, who was tweeting out furiously that
Video
she'd been
fan.
pulled over by the police while driving through Hackney. It turned out that one, she wasn't driving, and two, they'd stopped the car because they thought that it might have been stolen. And she then promised to put out all sorts of video evidence of how she'd been victimised because she was black, and it turned out not to really be anything like that.
And actually, in the video that she filmed herself, the police came off looking really very polite.
They did.
And all they'd done was make a simple mistake when checking the registration of the car, and she was the one who came off looking terrible. She was horribly rude to them, and then she basically manufactured this whole grievance mongering narrative off the back of the Black Lives Matter uproar, and then she made it into this whole thing about systemic racism
only
when
reason?
it was
Yeah.
obviously a fabricated outrage.
But the relish she took in that situation, she was like all her ships came home at once. Ooh, they've pulled me
Finally.
up. It's a stop and search. Oh, look at me, look, I've been stopped and searched.
And she was tweeting about it.
Racist.
She was
And
tweeting
came
about it,
out-
so excited.
Yeah,
Oh, I know.
exactly. She was so thrilled by it, and she came out of it looking like an absolute idiot.
Yeah.
Completely hoisted by her own petard, as you say. The cops behaved particularly politely. It turned out that they couldn't see in the car because it had darkened windows, so they didn't even know who was in it. It was an absolute pile of nonsense, and I don't think she did her career any good at all.
No, I don't think she did. Now, I'm not sure we've got enough time to do this justice, but number 11 on the planks list before we enter the top 10 is Mr. Matt Hancock, Secretary of State for Health, chief banner of all things that are any fun.
Loser, useless, wish he'd never been born. Next.
That's probably slightly hard. I mean, I wish you'd just say what you think. You know, Emma, give us a
And
kind and gentle
where
version
do
of
you
that.
begin with Matt Hancock? I mean, there was the interview that he did the other day where they were asking him about the MPs having their salaries raised, and he was sort of antsy, shifting
Right.
in his seat, didn't want to say that he really does actually want the pay rise.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what's happening in the rest of the country. But it's just, his interviews are so bad. And there was the one where he was, you know, crying because he was so emotional
Yeah, the
about the
weeping
first
thing.
vaccine, that William
What's that all
Shakespeare
about?
had the first vaccination, but he always looks like he's laughing, like he's sort of enjoying it. And,
He looks quite smug, doesn't he?
his whole interview manner is so abhorrent. It's just impossible to like the man.
He's also the same guy that came out in the House of Commons, I think, saying that you don't want to be killing your granny.
Yeah.
I don't think I know anyone who wants to kill their granny.
That's exactly right about Matt Hancock. He is the high priest of what's so infuriating about this government. He is the high priest of only one side of the argument. this completely blocking out of the Great Barrington Declaration, 40,000 scientists, epidemiologists, virologists and doctors all saying you don't need lockdowns, they do more harm than good. The fact that there's a very strong medical argument that the coronavirus really isn't that virulent. It's not virulent enough to warrant what they're doing to this country. He, like the rest of them, but he is the main one who just completely closes his ears to that side of the argument. Oh no, we're doing the right thing.
He comes across
Population
like a
going, no,
defensive
you're not.
child, like a defensive child who's been caught red-handed
Yeah,
and just is going to deny everything.
Because he has to close his ears to that side of the argument, because we all say there's a lot of credence to that other side of the argument, and if there is, Matt Hancock, Boris Johnson, the whole lot of them are sunk, absolutely sunk.
And of course there was also the interview that to cross over planks that he did with Kay Burley,
Yes.
where she was it looked like her sort of hardwiring had gone, and she kept saying misogynist, homophobe in relation to Tony Abbott.
That's right, the Australian.
And he didn't know how to handle it, and she was obviously being completely absurd. She actually looked like she was having some kind of,
episode.
Yeah, and he didn't know what to do. All he did was this smug smile again.
By the way, he's a very ambitious young man. I've got bad news for him. His political career is over.
And he doesn't
is the
seem to know
first,
it.
He is the first for the high jump.
No
as soon as they
self-awareness.
can. He doesn't realise that.
Guys,
He's
thank
doing
you
a
very
great
much.
job.
Indeed, that's the first top 10 of the top 20 taken care of. Coming up, we'll go back into the next 5, which will be numbers 10 down to 5. Emma Webb, thank you very much. Kevin, I think you're staying with us. Olivia Utley's going to join us from The Sun. Coming next on Plank of the Year. Welcome back to Plank of the Year. This is when it starts to get a bit exciting. We're going to find out who's in the top 10. We've got an audience watching us as well. We're hanging on our every word as we find out with Olivia Utley and, of course, Kevin O'Sullivan, who's still with us, exactly who is going to start kicking off the top 10. And I'm going to come to you first, Olivia. Top 10, number 10, The Guardian.
Yeah. What exactly? What were the things that The Guardian have?
Well, The Guardian has had what can only be described as a pretty terrible year, right?
Yeah.
Because, of course, Suzanne Moore came out and described
Oh.
The Guardian as possibly the most poisonous, ghastly, hideous place that she has ever
Yeah.
worked. Even though she's worked there for 25 years, they forced her out because apparently she's the wrong kind of feminist.
Oh yes, of course. Sorry, it was just inadvertently.
I mean, it's so
proving
easy to
how
forget these
irrelevant The
things, right? I
Guardian
mean,
is,
apart from the fact that it's the
exactly.
most useless paper in Britain.
Don't forget,
But, you know.
Olivia, that it publishes Carol Cadwallader's Lives.
Oh.
Yes, there is
Yeah.
that. But Carol Cadwallader, funnily enough, has not so far made the list. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, the Suzanne Moore debacle was absolutely ridiculous. The entire point of columnists is that they write their own opinion.
Yeah.
The editorial board of the paper doesn't need to agree with every single opinion that their columnist writes. Otherwise, it's just the same old rubbish from the same old people. And Suzanne Moore just couldn't bear to work there anymore, so she's out. There's definitely rumblings that other people aren't liking it there either. And just all over Twitter, you've got sort of civil war breaking out. They've got an audience of sort of, what is it, 100, 115?
Well, ever dwindling. No, I think the daily actual
print.
print sales, Kevin, of The Guardian are now down somewhere around 60,000. And of course, they then say, "Oh yeah, but we've got this great online business," except it doesn't make any money.
Doesn't make any
and
money.
it's also
They
run by
employ
the Scott
thousands
Trust,
of
which doesn't
people.
pay any tax. Apart from that, they're a great bunch of
The
leftists.
staff's mum don't buy the paper, they're finished. Now the thing about the Suzanne Moore thing is, don't forget, what she actually said was that there is a difference between a naturally born woman and a trans woman. And
Shocking.
Let's dare to
Absolutely
say
outrageous.
there is. And this is the important thing. More than 300 of the staff of that free-thinking newspaper, that champion of free speech, signed a petition demanding that they got rid of her for stating such a heinous thing.
And of course she said it in a totally acceptable, polite, but it's transphobic to have the debate at all.
Yeah.
But also,
so
as you
that's
said,
allowed.
Olivia, surely the point of a newspaper columnist is to have an opinion, and the point of having other columnists in the same newspaper
Is that
you can
don't write
disagree.
a snide letter having a little bitch
Yeah,
about
but this
your
is the new thing, isn't it?
columnist.
All these people who work in news organisations. I think there was there not one at Penguin Books?
Yeah, the same
recently,
deal, yeah.
When they decided to have a petition to get rid of some author. Or other.
Hachette Books have just cancelled Judy Birchall's book
Well,
about
Jordan
cancel
Peterson's
culture.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson's new book, which is going to make the publishing company an absolute fortune. And they were like, "We don't feel like you should be publishing it." It's like, well, you work here. You're welcome to make a complaint if you wish, but you can't just say we now have to bankrupt the business and fire all the people that make all the
I
money.
seem to remember that was some really junior person
Yeah.
as well who was complaining.
The one who complained said that, I was in tears when I found out that you were publishing this book. It's like, really? You need to get out more.
But to go back to The Guardian, it is a window into the twisted psyche, collective psyche of that newspaper. More than 300 of its journalists signed a petition to call for the sacking of a columnist who said what she thinks. I mean, what on earth are they doing in journalism?
It's so embarrassing to be watching this whole civil war breaking out. I mean, you just don't do that to your colleagues all publicly, and no one's reading it anyway. And I look on Twitter, and I'm quite involved in this sort of world, and I still don't have a clue what's going on. I follow 10 threads back, and I think, and it's just totally nonsensical to the average person reading the paper.
I know.
There's always
also they also employ Owen Jones, so that's another
constant run on toilet paper at the moment. So when you run out, you know which newspaper to use.
Absolutely right.
Nice
now,
newspaper.
moving on to number 9, one of our favourites, Jolyon Moore, the fox killer from last year. He didn't quite make the list last year because he waited until Boxing Day, disgracefully, when Plank of the Year had already gone out. We didn't actually make the list for killing a fox while dressed in his wife's kimono. So even if that wasn't the greatest story of all time, which of course it is, I mean, he's had an entire year of nonsensical lawsuits, most of which seem to end up being filed against the government, most of which cost the taxpayer loads and loads of money. And he's got one currently against the NHS, which if he wins will mean that NHS money, rather than being spent on patients, will actually be going to the Good Law Project, as he calls it, because he is apparently the keeper of all morals in the country. Not to forget the fact that he's got a dispute currently going with his builder, who the builder says owes him £2 million, and he's only given him £1 million. This is a bloke who pretends to be poor.
See, the thing is, this guy, what he doesn't realise is last Christmas Day, or was it Boxing Day, when he beat a poor fox to death wearing his wife's
with
kimono,
a baseball bat.
With a baseball bat. He does not realise that was as his projected image. He wanted to project an image of the good guy, the nice guy, Remainer, cares about people, wants brotherhood of man. When he did that to that fox, and then blindly thought it was a good thing to boast about on Twitter, that was the day he was finished. He has been finished ever since then. I'm a well-known animal lover. I can't forgive him for that, but even people who aren't that bothered about animals looked at that and thought, you cruel so-and-so. I would use another term, but we're on television. He is an awful person who thought nothing of beating an innocent creature to death with a baseball bat while it was trapped in a net because it was near their chickens or something. And ever since that, don't you try and tell us you're humanitarian. You're the exact opposite. He's absolutely finished. No one takes him seriously, but he's definitely a Plank of the Year contender.
He's also an absolutely terrible liar, and there have been so many instances of this, but the one I really remember was I was on some BBC radio programme, and it was Chris Mason hosting it, and he was talking to Jolyon Moore about this death threat that he'd apparently received, which is absolutely awful if he'd received a death threat. Then he said, I've had to buy myself a bulletproof vest. And Chris Mason said, goodness, that's terrible. How would you even go about buying a bulletproof vest? Well, he just hadn't. He was like, where's this bulletproof vest from? And he went,
bulletproof vest shop.
Literally. And then eventually he said, I'm going to have to go now, and just hung up. And he just really had to force himself.
And he's another one who did that thing where he appeared on some, Radio 4 show to be interviewed about how awful his life had become after beating the fox to death. You're quite right. If you think about what you would have to do, those sort of reenactments, and he had to just do that with a baseball bat to a fox's head. It's disgusting.
I'm no fox
It's
bat.
horrible.
That's vile.
Just a horrible individual.
You can't do that. He's finished.
Right, number 8 though, if you think he's vile, what about Prince Andrew?
You mean the liar?
Yeah, the liar, the man who will not help the police with their inquiries because it might incriminate him.
He's a liar and a moron. That's the problem. He came away from that.
He has got some bad points as well.
Yeah. He came away from that. I mean, he's a well-known pompous fool.
Yeah.
That's what he's renowned for at the palace. The courtiers have always despaired on him. He's really up himself.
Spoiled
He's
brat.
stupid enough to think I really am superior because I'm so high-born. But he came away from that now notorious interview with Emily Maitlis on Newsnight, which was now last November, so like 13 months ago, thinking he'd done a great job, cleared his name.
That was hilarious.
You know,
How do you think that went? Yeah, really well.
Exactly. And now he won't sit down with the FBI. The FBI calling for him to be interviewed about his association with Jeffrey Epstein. What does he know? He's not actually being accused of any crime.
No.
Now, people say he's said he's offered a statement, but he won't sit down with them. People say, well, why won't he sit down with them? I think, well, because he's a pompous fool. But I think it's the palace and the courtiers saying, we cannot let this moron loose again. If we sit him down with the FBI, God knows what he's going to say.
Right.
He'll end up under arrest. So he is a fool, a liar, and he's in such disgrace he will never be allowed into public life again. He wasn't even allowed to pose for photos at his daughter's wedding.
I know.
I mean, how much worse can it get?
And I don't understand how he's stupid enough to think that this whole thing is just going to sort of disappear if he ignores it for long enough. It's clearly not. The FBI are onto him, and they're going to keep tapping away. And the American police are just getting more and more furious that he's not paying them any attention, and they're not going to let it drop. So how he's arrogant enough to think that they will? I mean, if I were him, I'd get it out of the way quickly while there are all these COVID restrictions in place. At least he won't have to go.
And also, think about his poor mother, the Queen. You know, who has to sit there every week. And I mean, it's been recently brought up again because the Mail have done a big investigation into what he's lied about in the past. You just think, you know, the poor woman. I mean, she's got enough to worry about. Why can't you just draw a line over it? You know, call an end to it all, and just do the right thing.
And of course, you know, Harry and Meghan have given the royal family a real kind of public image problem, and but you know, meanwhile, there's this sort of gaping sore, weeping on the side of their image, and it's Prince Andrew. He is much worse than Harry and Meghan, I think, in terms of what the damage he's done to the royal family. All they did was run away. He is a real, clear and present massive problem for them. It's a problem that they have to sort out. But they